The 1970s, an era of bold ideas, wild trends, and some seriously questionable car designs. We've all seen a car that made us scratch our heads, but some designs from the 1970s were so outlandish that they left us wondering if the designers were playing a joke on us. Today, we're counting down the 20 ugliest cars of the 1970s. Let's take a closer look and see if these forgotten flops are truly as bad as they seem, or if they're misunderstood classics in disguise. 20. 1979 Ford Pinto. The infamous Ford Pinto. Not just ugly, but dangerous. The Pinto's reputation for catching fire when rear-ended only added to its horrendous image. On top of that, it looked like an awkwardly squashed box of metal. A small car with a big ego, but none of the charm. Its awkward shape was only overshadowed by the scandal that surrounded it. 1978 Dodge Aspen. Here's the 1978 Dodge Aspen, a car that was as uninspiring as it sounds. The Aspen looked like someone designed a car just to meet a checklist of requirements, without considering any real style. It had that typical 70s awkwardness with strange fender lines and flat surfaces. It was basic, it was bland, it was boring. 18. 1974 Vanden Plas 1500. Another British disaster, the 1974 Vanden Plas 1500. This luxury car was based on the already pathetic Austin Allegro. The Vanden Plas 1500 was supposed to be a step up, but instead it was like putting a nice coat of paint on a rusted-out old shed. Its odd, wedge-like shape, lack of interior space, and general ugliness only made it clear. British Leyland had zero concept of quality control in the 70s. 17. The 1977 Volvo 262C. Volvo's attempt to mix luxury with their typically boxy designs. They took the 262, chopped off part of the roof, and somehow thought it would work. The result was a car that looked cramped, out of proportion, and entirely impractical. As if a Volvo wasn't already bland enough, now it was a bland luxury car that no one really wanted. 16. The 1975 British Leyland Princess. What happens when a car tries to be a hatchback, but ends up as an automotive nightmare? The Princess was awkwardly shaped, uncomfortable, and honestly forgettable. It had the charm of a damp piece of cardboard and the reliability of a paper airplane in a rainstorm. 15. The 1970 AMC Gremlin. Because why not start with something that looks like it was chopped in half and reassembled? With its stubby body and rear end that seems to have given up, the Gremlin looks like a compact car that forgot the compact part. But hey, it was cheap, practical, and hit the sweet spot for budget-conscious buyers. So, while it may have been an eyesore, it was a huge sales success. Maybe the best thing about the Gremlin was that it was small enough to disappear in your rearview mirror. 14. 1970 Buick Riviera. Before this disaster, the Riviera was known for its sleek, beautiful lines. But then, 1970 came along, and Buick decided to toss elegance out the window. The front end looks like it melted, while the rear fenders look like they're trying to eat the wheels. It's almost as if they took a graceful coupe and gave it a waterlogged, bloated makeover. Maybe someone should have pulled the plug before the mold started growing. 13. 1970 Ford Thunderbird. Ford's 1970 Thunderbird took a leap into the bizarre with its oversized front beak. Imagine if the T-Bird tried to become a Pelican and failed miserably. Instead of sleek and sophisticated, we got a bird with a beak so big it could have starred in a prehistoric film. This isn't a car you cruise in for a chic night out. This is more the type of car that would show up at a costume party wearing a bird costume with zero self-awareness. 12. 1972 Subaru GL Coupe. The 1972 Subaru GL Coupe. Here's a car that looks like the designer took a regular Subaru and asked, what happens if we cut it in half and throw on some random parts? The back end looks like it was hacked off, and that was before they slapped a new bumper and taillights on. The result is a mishmash of awkward design choices that scream last-minute decision. It's the car equivalent of someone trying to pull off a look that never quite works. 1973 Leyland P76. The 1973 Leyland P76 is an Australian disaster. Think of it as a wedge-shaped car with a trunk big enough to store a barrel of disappointment. This massive mess of a car looked like it was designed to not only be unattractive, but downright depressing. The wedge shape and lack of style make it look like it was built just to tick off everyone who looked at it. 2 years and 18,000 sales later, it was gone, and probably for the best. 10. 1974 Bricklin SV1, a car with all the wrong ideas. It's a car that looks like someone tried to fuse a futuristic design with a low-budget sci-fi movie prop. With its bulbous bumpers, slit windows, and just about every other design flaw you can imagine, this is a car that screams not quite right from every angle. It's like the designer was told to make the safest car and took it too literally, with zero concern for style. 9. 1974 Sebring Vanguard City Car. Here's the 1974 Sebring Vanguard City Car. A glorified golf cart, but somehow even worse. It's not fast, not efficient, and definitely not pretty. The design is so basic it could be mistaken for a child's toy. It was slow, ugly, and unsafe, and yet somehow the designers thought it would be the future of electric cars. Not quite the electric dream we imagined. 8. 1970 Saab Sonnet 3. When Saab tried to enter the American market, they thought long overhangs and awkwardly sharp angles would make a statement. But instead, they created a visual disaster that looked like it was in an identity crisis. The overlong front end is already pushing it, but then the truncated tail end gives it an unfinished, unbalanced look. This car screams, "We tried, but maybe we shouldn't have." 7. 1974 Ford Mustang 2. The 1974 Ford Mustang 2 is where Ford took a classic American muscle car and turned it into a sad, undersized disappointment. Not only was the Mustang shrunk down to a more compact size, but it also came with the infamous Mustang Ghia package, which tried to make it luxurious with padded vinyl roofs and opera windows. If there was ever a car that screamed identity crisis, it was this one. 6. 1975 AMC Pacer. Here's the 1975 AMC Pacer, a car with a glassy, fishbowl look that made it feel more like a science project than a vehicle. With its massive windows and awkwardly wide body, the Pacer tried to be ahead of its time, but it ended up being the automotive equivalent of a social experiment gone wrong. The worst part? The redesign in 1978 only made it worse with a bloated hood and new V8 engine that couldn't hide the fact that it was still an oddball. 5. 1977 Datsun 200SX. From Japan, the 1977 Datsun 200SX entered the market as a supposed sporty coupe. But with its awkward styling, strange grille, and rearward visibility issues, the 200SX looked more like a midlife crisis car than a dream machine. It wasn't fast, wasn't particularly fun, and wasn't even that stylish. The fact that it rusted faster than it drove didn't help. 4. 1977 Chevrolet Caballero. Meet the 1977 Chevrolet Caballero, the car that shouldn't have been made. Based on the Chevrolet Chevette, the Caballero was a combination of a sports car and a pickup that somehow missed both targets. With its absurd fiberglass body and over-the-top modifications, it looked like a car that had given up on fitting in with any category and decided to be everything at once, and failed spectacularly. 3. 1979 Chrysler Cordoba. Finally, the 1979 Chrysler Cordoba. The Cordoba, with its overstuffed interiors, plush seats, and luxury feel, was a car caught in an era of excess. But instead of offering sophistication, it simply delivered something heavy, bloated, and unappealing. Plus, with its cringy marketing campaign with Ricardo Montalban, it tried way too hard to sell its rich Corinthian leather without ever quite earning it. 2. 1970 Porsche 914. Here's the Porsche 914, and while it's a car that some Porsche enthusiasts still adore, it's impossible to ignore its odd proportions. It's like someone took a classic sports car design and tried to make it quirky, and the result is a car that just doesn't look right. The long, awkward space between the B-pillar and the rear wheel doesn't do it any favors. It's like the car was designed with, let's make it look like a car no one wants to drive, as a challenge. 1. 1973 Reliant Robin. Then there's the 1973 Reliant Robin. It's a three-wheeled car that looks like it was made for a parade float, but with none of the charm. The Reliant Robin wasn't just ugly. It looked like the very concept of cheap incarnate. The awkward body proportions and the desperate stance of a car that doesn't want to be a car at all make it one of the saddest vehicles on the road. And let's face it, no one's ever going to look at this car and think, now that's a beauty. So there you have it, 20 cars from the 1970s that prove the road to automotive innovation is sometimes paved with questionable decisions and, let's be honest, a bit of sheer chaos. But hey, the beauty of these machines is that they weren't afraid to stand out, even if that standout was for all the wrong reasons. These cars may have missed the mark on style, but they've earned their place in history as symbols of a bold experimental time. After all, not every car can be a beauty queen. Some are just unforgettable. Next time you're cruising down the road, just remember, sometimes the ugliest cars make the best stories. And if you're lucky enough to spot one, take a moment to appreciate the boldness, the audacity, and the beauty of failure. Until next time, keep your wheels turning and your taste in cars evolving.